This is Olbermann versus Trump, and thank God I'm not Trump. Had 'em all the way. Congratulations to President-Elect-Presumptive Biden and Vice President-Elect-Presumptive Harris. This is not the time for recriminations, but it is the time to address crimes and attacks on our form of government that have happened since Thursday. The lame duck president of the United States is in the throes of profound paranoid delusions, perhaps even hallucinations, and he must be removed from office as soon as possible via the 25th Amendment or by any other legal means. Waiting 75 days is no longer possible. In the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, which killed another 1,100 Americans yesterday, the nation cannot have a leader with access to weapons and troops who is not of sound mind and who is convinced he is being conspired against. It also cannot have a leader who, through his henchmen and his family, is overtly encouraging violence against groups and specific individuals and even specific federal officers. And most importantly, it cannot have a leader who, through his words and the words of his hirelings, is fomenting armed insurrection against the duly constituted government of the United States and of the individual states. It has long been evident that, whatever the precise diagnosis, Trump's brain does not work correctly. But during his speech from the White House press room and his subsequent communications, his lunatic expression of a persecution complex reached a new and even more disturbing level. I call for the cabinet to execute its responsibilities under the 25th Amendment to remove Donald John Trump from the presidency because he is no longer even remotely mentally capable of fulfilling the duties of that office. In addition, Trump's son Donald John Trump Jr. has now twice publicly violated federal law, 18 U.S. Code 373, solicitation to commit a crime of violence. Donald Trump Jr. has tweeted, quote, "The best thing for America's future is for real Donald Trump to go to total war over this election," end quote. And in a gathering before the media in Atlanta, Donald Trump Jr. then said, quote, "The number one thing that Donald Trump can do in this election is to fight each and every one of these battles to the death," end quote. Paragraph A of 18 U.S. Code 373, solicitation to commit a crime of violence, reads in part, quote, "Whoever with intent that another person engage in conduct constituting a felony that has an element, the use, attempted use of physical force against property or against the person of another, solicits, commands, induces, or otherwise endeavors to persuade such other person to engage in such conduct, if the crime solicited is punishable by life imprisonment or death, shall be imprisoned for not more than 20 years. I call for the immediate arrest and prosecution of Donald Trump Jr. for violation of 18 U.S. Code 373. At the same event in Atlanta, the state representative Vernon Jones of Georgia said, quote, "The fight is just getting started. We're starting to see the whites of their eyes, and we're getting ready to start shooting," end quote. I call for the immediate arrest and prosecution of State Representative Vernon Jones for violation of 18 U.S. Code 373. On a live YouTube broadcast, Stephen Bannon, former Trump White House chief strategist, already out on bail on charges of criminal fraud, called for the beheading of the FBI Director Christopher Wray and the beheading of the Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, quoting, "Second term kicks off with firing Wray, firing Fauci. No, I actually want to go a step farther. I'd actually like to go back to the old times of Tudor England. I'd put the heads on pikes, right? I'd put them at the two corners of the White House." Paragraph B, 18 U.S. Code 115, under the heading Assault of United States Officials reads, "Whoever threatens to assault, kidnap, or murder a United States official shall be punished, if the assault resulted in serious bodily injury, a term of imprisonment for not more than 30 years. I call for the revocation of bail and the immediate rearrest and prosecution of Stephen Bannon for violation of 18 U.S. Code 115. During a Salem radio network broadcast, Sebastian Gorka, a Trump appointee to the National Security Education Board, said, quote, "We need the U.S. Marshals to deploy, and they need to break down the doors of those polling stations." I call for the immediate arrest and prosecution of Sebastian Gorka for violation of 18 U.S. Code 115. If you think this is all just harsh rhetoric that the Trump supporters used, Last night, Philadelphia police captured 2 heavily armed men who they said had driven there from Virginia. They said they were tipped that the intent was to, quote, attack the convention center. The convention center, the kind of polling station Gorka wants the doors to broken down. Back for a moment to this president. Even if he had not shouted baseless conspiracy theories and non-existent claims of voting fraud and threatened states with revenge if they do not return results he likes, even if this creature had been acting in a somewhat sane manner, his incapacity to continue in office would have been underscored by the self-contradictory nature of his electoral demands. He believes himself the victim of the greatest crime in history, the most massive gathering of nefarious forces possible to fix an election for the Democrats. The same Democrats who somehow fixed the election but forgot to fix the Senate election and who managed to lose seats in the House. And initially, Trump tweeted, quote, "Stop the count." Then someone evidently made him realize that had all vote counting indeed stopped right then, Joe Biden would have immediately become president-elect. So at his news tantrum, he then changed his demand and insisted vote counting should continue in Arizona and Nevada, but then insisted that more vote counting in Pennsylvania would be rigged and fraudulent. The explanation is not difficult. Further counting of votes, particularly postal votes, would have benefited him in Arizona and Nevada and would harm him in Pennsylvania. Just as his earlier stance was that vote counting had to stop in Georgia, be recounted in Wisconsin, continue in Arizona, stop in Pennsylvania, be recounted in Michigan, resume in Nevada, and stop in North Carolina. The hypocrisy would be evident to a child, but not to Donald Trump, not in his deteriorated mental and emotional state. He cannot continue as president. Donald Trump Jr. cannot be allowed to again threaten, quote, total war and battles to the death over the election. Vernon Jones cannot be permitted to pronounce, quote, we're getting ready to start shooting. Stephen Bannon cannot be able to threaten to behead Dr. Fauci and FBI Director Wray and, quote, put the heads on pikes. Sebastian Gorka cannot be indulged when he insists U.S. Marshals break down the doors of polling stations. The lunacy of a president and the calls to insurrection and violence by his surrogates must be met by the strongest weapon in this nation, the law. Good night and good luck.